Good morning to you all. I want you to know that today is the 20th of August. I believe it's AB's birthday. And he's out in West Florida enduring the hardship of Golden Beach sands and Fort Walton Beach and nice seafood, but it is his birthday. So I'm filling in for him today, as I often do, once a month. And I want you to know that this week is a very exciting week for Tallahassee. Do you know why that is? What will be happening this week? The students return, right? The college students, all 70,000 plus of them. Target will be packed. And if you're a college student, you're like, wow, I'm coming back to Tallahassee to resume my education, some of them to finish my education. The idea of returning to Tallahassee for this time of year. It's exciting for us in Tallahassee. I maintain it is. Students are great for business, aren't they? I owe some of my income to students. I really believe that. I audited Department of Education. Without the students, I don't have a job. Then I went to work for the Department of Revenue. Without the students, we don't have the revenue in this town. They're a big deal. But, you know, just because the students are returning, I looked and I said, look at the weekly forecast. And I said, wow, it's 101 on Wednesday. I saw that on my phone. I'm like, wow, the students return, but summer is not leaving. So I want to talk about returning today. It is the theme of the message in essence. If you love a movie, do you love movies? If you love a movie, raise your hand. If you love novels, raise your hand. If you love novels that become movies, raise both hands. If you love drama, going to plays, if you like music, I'd suggest to you one of the major plot devices of all times is the return. I mean, think about it. Lord of the Rings, what's the title of the third movie? Return of the King, okay? One of my favorite novels by Thomas Hardy, Return of the Native. A man returns to the land he's from thinking his life will be set out before him. He finds out it isn't the case. How about Cold Mountain? A soldier returns to the woman he loves. And his return isn't what he hoped for in the end, but he ends up saving several lives. How about from history? Who can name the United States general who promised his men who were in the Philippines, I shall return? Who was that? Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur was a prima donna. He really was. He could be obnoxious, but he also had an incredible sense of history. So he told his men, I'll return. He was leaving them in 1942. The Japanese took over the islands. In 1944, he came back. He made sure the cameras were there when he walked off the ship and splashed ashore. He made sure they were there. He says, I returned. I'd like to think he even has a role in my family's history. You know why? Because he was in Tokyo Bay on the day the Japanese surrendered. He was on board the USS Missouri. The USS Missouri had been destroyed in the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. But there was in Tokyo Bay, the message to the Japanese was simple. You may have sunk our ship in Pearl Harbor. It rose. It's here now. The United States Navy is in charge now. And I say that because my mom and my dad ended up in Japan as part of the occupying army of Japan. They met there and they got married. So I say, thank you, General MacArthur, for playing a key role in my family's history. But if you want to think about returns, three of the most historical returns all involve Jesus Christ, okay? All three. Two of them have already happened. What do you think they are? What do you think a major return by Jesus that affected all of history? How about after? Yes. That's right. He returned from the grave. Absolutely changed history. If you're a disciple, it changed your personal history. Jesus returned from the grave. He overcame the world. He gave you the message, you can overcome the world based on me. And then after he'd been out of the grave for a while, where'd he go next? He returned to heaven. Why did this change history, do you think? Why? Well, if he'd stayed on the earth, could he have had as great an impact if he'd stayed on the earth? No, he went back to heaven to become God's right-hand man, to affect all of history. He intervenes in our lives today based on being the right-hand man of God, being God's son. So that return was big. There's one more still to come in there. We can't begin to describe what that will be like when Jesus returns to the earth. The Bible states that all the world will see him. It's interesting to me because when he returned from the grave, only a certain number of people were in on that, right? When in Acts chapter 1 he returned to heaven, only a certain number of people saw that. When he returns again, who will be included in that? Everyone will see it. There will be no doubt on that day Jesus is Lord. He's Lord now, but I believe the whole earth will recognize it on that day. I want to tell a story about a parable today. If you can, turn to Luke chapter 15 or just watch the screen behind me. I'm glad the screen will be up behind me with the scripture, because while it's up, you don't get to see how bald I am in the light. I've asked God to return my hair. He's not answering. But Luke 15:11 tells the story about a man who returns to a right relationship with God. And we're going to call this something a little different today. A lot of you know the story as the story of the prodigal son. You know the story, we're about to read it. But today we're going to call it the prodigal father. You go, what do you mean the prodigal father? The father didn't leave. But prodigal, our brother Mark Roberts tells us, is defined as lavish and extravagant. And the father's reaction in this story when his son returns is lavish and extravagant. The love he has for this son. Okay? And you see depicted in this action photo. You see the son running to the father. Well, we're actually seeing the story. He wasn't the only one running. When the son returned, the father, he was running too. And it gives us a view of God's character. That's why we're calling it the prodigal father. Yeah, I know the son went off and spent money lavishly and expensively, got in trouble, then he realized where he was spiritually. And at that point, he wanted to return to his father, and he did. But what was the father's reaction? The prodigal father, I'll start reading in Luke 15, verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them." Now in verse 12, we get a little view. What's the son like at this moment? He's a bit entitled, isn't he? Give me my share. I mean, the father probably had more to do with raising up the estate than the son, but it was, give me my share. Now, sometimes I hear people commenting about young people today, oh, they're so entitled. I'm like, some young people are entitled, some are not. Don't make blanket statements. But entitlement of the son, well, that kind of existed 20 centuries ago, didn't it? Jesus knew all people. It's not exclusive to today. If you're tempted to say that, now man's sinful nature has been around for a long time. There was entitlement then, okay? But how did the father react? Verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country. In other words, he did not stay close to home. And there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So what has transgressed here? What has happened is he spent it all, didn't he? Perhaps in a short period of time. Human nature does that sometimes, doesn't it? Have you ever heard of people who won the lottery and what happened to them afterwards? You know, if you win the lottery, one of the greatest risks you have is definitely an increase in dying. I've read enough about the lottery, and I worked in that building for a number of years to know that when people get great wealth, sometimes they don't know what to do with it. That, too, is endemic to the human sinful nature. It's not a new story. It's been around for a while, as evidenced by this parable. Well, now there's a famine, so verse 15 says, "So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs." A wonderful job. An entry-level job, not maybe even below entry level. He's now feeding the pigs. It says, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So he's gone from wealthy share of inheritance to, man, I could wish I'd eat what the pigs eat. You know, I've had times where my wife will tell you, our dog Finbar has lost a lot of his teeth. So when I give him a treat, I've got to break it up for him. So every now and then, it means that I taste a little bit of his dry dog food. Let me tell you, it ain't all that. So when you reach the point where you wish you could eat what the pigs were eating, you're not doing well, are you? He had reached that point of need. But here's the transition. Here's the beginning of the dramatic return. Verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" He's no longer entitled, is he? Now, he'd be satisfied with just make me one of your servants. He's not going to even claim sonship, inheritance. He's like, okay, I've learned my lesson. I've hurt my dad. I'm going back to him. And if all he ever allows me to be is one of his hired servants, at this point, he's like, that would be okay with me. It is better than pig food, isn't it? You know what? I pause there because every one of us who has been a disciple knows what that feels like, right? Every one of us who decided to become a disciple. I learned something from Kevin Fessler today again. I've been learning things from him for over 30 years. He decided to become a disciple sitting in a dorm room and got baptized 1:10 in the afternoon on a Monday. He said, I need God, and he went for it. If you're a disciple, you have to do that at some point in your life. And then you'll find out you'll have to do it over and over again throughout your life. But now I really want to hone in on verses 20 to 24, because we've seen what the son did. We saw the wrong he made. We saw how he came to his senses. What was the father's reaction? Verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. What are the characteristics of the Father in this? Because, what we're doing today, we're closing a series on the kingdom. What are the characteristics of the king when one of his subjects comes back and says, I've messed everything up? What are the characteristics of the Father? I'm going to ask the ushers to pass out the boxes at this time. If you can chime in on this question. What are the characteristics of the Father? I'll start with one as an example. Was the Father faithful toward his son even when he didn't see him? What do you think? Was he faithful to him? I think he was. He was looking for him. Oh my. He was looking for him. He knew his son had probably messed up, but he had enough faith to believe the son one day will come back. He was looking for him. We've heard scriptures, God is faithful even if we're not. God is faithful in reaching out to you and to me, even when we foul up. So the characteristic of the father was still faithful. Okay, let's start with there. Let's start with Leslie.
That's something that I was going to share
Oh,
because
sorry,
it
Leslie.
said that not only was he faithful, I do feel like he was extremely compassionate.
Yup.
Because his son came to him humble, knowing he messed up and ready to just be a servant. And he was there waiting, looking, and ready to receive his son with open arms, where he went running to him. And, that's a lot of compassion as well.
Do you think, Leslie, the father had thought it through? The situation? Had he thought it through, given that was his reaction?
I guess so, yeah.
I think so too. Yes. Okay, over here, Cheryl. Bring one to Candace. Cheryl.
Well, I think that, I don't know if he thought it through, but I know that he never stopped loving his son, and his love was unconditional. He took him back no matter what he was or where he'd been.
I mean, could he have said to his son, you lost half the estate. You get to work, boy. Wouldn't that be kind of how we are? He did not react that way at all. Yes, Candace.
She kind of took my comment, but that's what I was just thinking. I never realized he kissed him. He still loved him, He didn't just stop loving him when he took all his money and went and did what he wanted to do. That love was still there for him,
It had never left. You want to talk about unenduring love? Someone does you bad? You're like, no, I'm determined to love him. The father was determined to love the son no matter what. Yes, Judy.
Well, I think this has maybe kind of been said, but I love the way it says that he was looking for him, because I think that's very similar to God, and we can sometimes forget that. Like, we think that we realize we need to seek God, but sometimes we forget that all along God is seeking us and setting up life so that perhaps we'll reach out to him.
Yeah, a couple more. Right there, and then we'll finish with Leon. Yes, sir.
It kind of reminds me of another situation that involves a kiss as well with Judas. I'm pretty sure that Jesus was looking for Judas as well as he was coming to him and returning, and still gave him a kiss, regardless of the sins and stuff that he did. He still gave him a kiss and said, "Do what you must do, friend." And that same love is shown here to the Father to the Son. The Father looked for the Son and brought him in wholly and honored him in a whole feast with the fattest calf. So it's amazing to see it, like, correlation in between that.
Well, I love that, the way he put that. It was a foreshadowing of how Jesus would be, right? Judas comes to betray him, kisses him. Jesus addressed him as friend, didn't he? Okay, well, I'll take one more there. And Leon, you'll be the last one, okay? Yes, sir.
I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but I really appreciate how the dad didn't keep any account of right or wrong, or didn't hold a grudge. And just kind of like it was said earlier, when the son came back, he could have been petty or could have had, I told you so mindset, but he had no type of grudge or ill will harbored towards his son. And I think that that's very respectable.
I mean, you think about that, and let me get the box to Leon. You think about that. I mean, I already said it. The son had squandered his share of the estate. He did not help the economic well-being of that family. Now, years later, you could still be thinking, well, we're still trying to earn it back. What happened years ago? I admit, I think that for myself sometimes. I had a bad run with credit cards in the 90s. I had to pay them back. Now I'm getting ready to retire, and I'm like, if I hadn't done that stupid thing I did in the 90s, I'd be further along. And that's the way I think. But that is not the way God thinks. The way God is, debt's canceled. Go forward. That's the kind of God we serve. He won't hold it against us years later. Yes, Leon.
He's very generous in his grace. I mean, he tells the servants to bring the fatted calf, put a new robe on him, give him sandals. All these things, not only is he graceful in taking him back, but in showing his love through the way that he wants to celebrate him coming back.
Wow. Yeah, no, you got to earn my trust back, okay? No, here's the ring. Here's the robe. Was it a cheap meal he provided? Here's the fattened calf. You know, as much as I love steak, I'm like, man, if I had messed up and come back to my dad and he made me a steak, maybe I would mess up. But the fact is, no withholding of generosity. He replaces what his son has squandered with wealth of his own. Did it cost the father to do that? Yes, it did. Was it misunderstood? Well, if you finish reading this parable, you know the other brother totally misunderstood what the father was doing. I want you to turn to Ephesians chapter 1, because we want to talk about just how lavish this grace God has given us, this new life He's given us that we did not earn. Because if we keep that in the forefront of our lives, I think we'll make it to heaven. If we really understand, I don't deserve any of this, but I want a relationship with God, we'll keep going. When you're tired, when you're hurt, when devastating things have happened to you, and we've had some of those things in our church the last few years, haven't we? Devastating events, things that are very heartbreaking in nature. And yet God's expectation of us is, no, you keep fighting, you keep coming towards me. But the reason we can do that is we know how much we are loved. Ephesians 1, verse 7, the writer of Ephesians says, in Him we have the redemption, through His blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace that He lavished on us. It's the same language. The church in Ephesus was receiving a letter, and they were being told, look, here's what God has done for you. Here's what God continues to do for you. And He was letting them know. The parable of the prodigal son, in this case we're calling it the prodigal father, it's not over, is it? The generosity continues. And you have to think about what it is from God's perspective. Not that we can think what He thinks, but from God's view, the generosity literally is only just beginning, isn't it? One day heaven, there will be eternal generosity. One day, me sinning and I'm still being allowed to live and approach the throne of God. I mean, have you ever been, well, I did that sin again, and I knew better. And we're like, oh, I don't feel like praying to God. How many times have I prayed this, and then I messed it up? God on the throne is like, no, you still come to the throne. That's unbelievable love. It's the best we'll ever have. Unbelievable. Let me share the story. I read years ago this biography of James Taylor, the singer. You know James Taylor? He wrote a lot of love songs. A lot of beautiful love songs, songs I utterly love. I think of God when I sing them sometimes. I think, shower the people. That is a love song. Shower the people. Let people know how much you love them. Show them the way that you feel. I think, well, that's how God is. James Taylor, when he was a young man, had serious addictions to alcohol and to drugs. And he was near death. And his father was in North Carolina, and James Taylor was up in New York City, and his father jumped in a car and went up there and grabbed his son and brought him home. That's what he did. His father was not that close to James Taylor, from what I read. His father spent a lot of time in the South Pole doing research. He was gone for years at a time, but when he found out his son was troubled, he went and got him. James Taylor wrote years later, he says, it saved my life. He was going to die of an overdose. He was convinced of it. The Father saved him. You know, even more so, that is the way it is with God, right? When we were mired in our sin, Romans 5, verse 6, at just the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. When we were at our worst, God's right there wanting to bring us in. That is a characteristic of the Father. It isn't just, I'm going to save you, set you straight, put you in an apartment, give you a purpose in life. No, it's lavish spending. It's, you don't deserve any of this, but I'm giving it to you anyway. And I believe, too, if we spend our lives with that in front of us, we'll make it to heaven, too. I believe that. You know, look at Ephesians 2. I'm going to read Ephesians 2, verses 6 through 9. And I want you to consider this. Was there risk for God in doing this for us? Was there risk for him in sending Jesus on the earth? Was there risk? There was huge risk. What if Jesus had sinned? Would he have been coming back? What if Jesus had not fulfilled dying on the cross? And what if Jesus did all that he did and a whole lot of people rejected it? You know, the hurt, I think, that God still feels when people don't listen to him, when he's like, I'm going to give you all the love you ever need, all the forgiveness you ever need. You don't deserve it, but it's yours. I want you as a son or daughter. God risked everything for us in sending Jesus to die for us. He risked it all. It might not work out. With a lot of people, they'll reject it their whole life. It won't work out. You think God knew this? He still wanted to risk it. Ephesians 2, verse 6. He's addressing this to people who are Christians. And he tells them, and God raised us up with Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus. I can't get my mind around that. Can you? We're like, no, Jesus belongs on the right hand of God. Jesus belongs all this esteem. But it says that we're being lifted up to the heavenly realms. Is this deserved? Absolutely not. I can't get my arm around that. Do you think sometimes to yourself, Jesus Christ is the King of Kings? He's royalty. And guess what? I'm related to him. Maybe I should wear purple more often. No, it's not deserved. Verse 7, why did he do what he said in verse 6? In verse 7 it says, in order that in the coming ages he might show the incomparable riches of his grace expressed in his kindness to us in Christ Jesus. How does he do this? He makes your life an illustration of what he is. If in your life you're full of grace, you're the kind of person who people do you wrong, but you choose not to judge them. You choose to love them anyway. If in your life you go through hard times, but you still exhibit joy toward God, he is using you to show his grace to the rest of humanity. You, sinful you. I can't comprehend that. I can't. I'll close with this little story, and then our handsome brother Vincent Palmer will get up and do the announcements. But I remember years ago, I was a fairly new disciple. I was living in an apartment with several brothers. At one point, it was like 7 brothers. I think Anthony Miller was one of them. We're in a little bit different living situation now. Well, actually, no, that was after this happened. I was living with 2 brothers, but 4 were about to move in, and we were going to temporary it for about 2 weeks. It was crazy. Well, I come home from an audit trip. We'd been in South Florida for 2 weeks. Or no, actually, it was Tampa for 1 week. And I get home, and I go in the parking lot, I'm looking for my car, and it ain't there anywhere. And I'm thinking, I think my car has been stolen. And the brother's looking at me, and I'm looking around, and he's like, oh, Jeff, it's terrible. It's awful. I hid your keys. I'm sorry. It's probably my fault. I said, it's not your fault. Someone broke into it, broke the steering column, and stole it. And he and the other people are looking at me. They're like, you don't seem upset. And I'm like, it's just a car. God knows where it is. I'll probably get it back. It'll probably smell bad, which was what happened. But I'll probably get it back. And to be honest with you, to this day, I don't know why I was so calm. I just thought, it's a stolen car, man. God will provide me transportation. And they were just like, geez, Jim, you were calm about that. I'm like, if I could only be so calm while watching football. But I can't explain that, okay? I can only say that was God. And other horrible situations that people go through in life. Our sister Gail Thomas, still faithful, still loves God. I can't comprehend how she feels. I don't know what it's like to be a parent, let alone to lose 2 children. I have no idea. My mom lost a child before I was born. I hope to see her in heaven one day. But Gail's still faithful. You can only explain that through Jesus Christ and God. You can only explain that through that. Horrible things happen to you all, but you still love God. You're still here. You still want to love other people. God is using you to transform the world. The people who see you, they're going to have a chance to know God based on you. You know, He is a prodigal Father. Our Father, the King of Kings, the one over the kingdom that's so great we can't define it. That's who He is. He's lavish with us. He spends on us. He gave His best to us. The world may not recognize it, but we do indeed have a prodigal Father. Let's keep that in mind as we go through this hot week. Thank you very much.